Okay, so this just happened to me and my buddy over the weekend, and I wanted to share this here. I'm 22 years old and have been living with my grandma since I was about 11. Now that I'm a bit older, I've been able to take care of her as her health has taken a downward slope. However, she is still able to get around on her own at home, and is still fully there mentally. So sometimes I go out with friends for the night just to kick it. And sometimes there are recreationals involved, but we stay out of trouble. I couldn't imagine doing something to disappoint the woman that has raised me. So, anyways, this was one of those nights where Curtis and I met up at our local spot to enjoy a night of no responsibilities and no one depending on us to do something. Our go-to spot was behind a building that had been abandoned some time ago. There was a narrow alleyway that connected it to some kind of doctor or dental office, but it closed at normal hours, so there wasn't another person in sight. We would sit back there to smoke and BS for hours before we would finally leave. That night, we got on the topic of food, and, as it goes, we started craving some of our favorite junk food. We made our way out through the alley into the nearest gas station, and once we were satisfied with our purchase, we went back to our spot. Walking through that alley was normal for us. We walked to that spot from his place since it was close, and that way, a parked car at an abandoned or closed building wouldn't alarm anyone. Being in that alley in the dark didn't scare us, especially when we weren't alone. It may not have been the best place in town, but we knew how to take care of ourselves. Not to mention, it was an unwritten rule that if you kept to yourself, minded your own business, no one would bother you or say anything to you. So, when we were walking through the alley and we saw a lanky and scruffy-looking old man, we didn't think anything of it, and we kept our conversation low and did not make eye contact. As we passed the guy, he let out a low, gravelly, "Heh." So we slowed our pace but kept walking and looked back at the guy. He held up his hand as if he was greeting us and asked if we had any smokes. I've been there before, so I stopped and pulled one out to give him. He then lit it with a matchbook that he had, thanked me, and as we nodded, we continued on. Pretty simple interaction that we thought nothing else of. We got back to our spot and started talking and screwing off again, when we saw that same guy walking out of the alley towards us. We weren't really going to be able to hide what we were doing, or rather smoking, so we just sat there, waiting to see how this would play out. The man approached and asked us if we had anything extra that he could smoke too. If it kept this guy from snitching on us, I guess I was happy to share, so I gave him what he asked for, and he was actually pretty cool. He asked us some general and not too personal questions, like if we hung out there a lot, and how we found this place. He even told us some interesting stories that he knew about the building we were behind. He seemed totally fine while we were talking, but then he dropped his head like he was in deep thought. We sat in silence for a minute before Curtis and I started talking to each other again, going on like there wasn't a third person sitting there with us. Everyone has their own things they're trying to work out, so I felt it best to let him sit there and not interrupt him. As we were talking, he started muttering to himself, but there was nothing that we could make out. After this continued for a bit, the guy slowly looked up and was staring right at me. Thinking he may have just had something to say, I looked back at him and just said, "What's up, boss?" "You shouldn't be here." I was confused at first, partially annoyed, thinking we were about to get some dumb lecture from some random guy about wasting our lives. But then it turned to confusion when I started thinking about how he's been sitting here with us this whole time, too. What exactly was his whole plan here? Curtis and I looked at each other, and he asked the man, "What do you mean?" "This is a dangerous place. You never know what you might encounter. Still feeling annoyed and confused, I made a comment about him being here too, or something to that effect. And that's when, without breaking eye contact, he smiled at me and said, I know. I've seen bad things happen here. I know things you couldn't possibly understand. Curtis started talking about how he was killing the mood, and I agreed with him. And this was supposed to be our time away from everything else, and now we got this stranger in our self-proclaimed spot talking about things that made no sense. We made a motion to each other to just get up and leave, when the guy once again spoke. I know things about you, Isaiah. Things you don't even understand about yourself. Now, when we're out doing what we were that night, we rarely actually use each other's full names. It was either us calling each other C or I, or one of the nicknames we'd given each other, and I can guarantee you that night, we never said our names around this guy. So, how did he know my name? I stood up and asked him how he knew me, and again, without as much as a flinch, the guy looked up at me smiling and said, It's easy when you have my eyes. Would you like to see into them too? I hadn't noticed before, as I had no reason to pay much attention to what he looked like. But as I stood over him, and the single light from above us lit up his face, I noticed his left eye was glossed over and still, unlike his right eye. It was a fake eye. Call me a jerk, but normally that's stuff I wouldn't even take notice to or care about. But between his cryptic talking, knowing my name, and the night now feeling incredibly tense, I was pretty unnerved by this. Curtis looked at me and basically just motioned that we should go, and I agreed. As we started walking away, he continued to sit in the same spot, not looking at us, and said, The night will always find you. We picked up our pace and got the hell out of there. We went back to Curtis's house and tried to shake off the bad vibes, our high already ruined. And shortly after, I went home and went to bed, hoping that guy was just off his rocker and that I would never see him again. Everything was fine the next day, and even most of the week until I was walking home from the gas station. It felt like I was being stared at, and typically I just got this annoyed feeling. You know, the kind when you want to look at someone like, you got a problem? But this time I was feeling more on edge. My fight or flight was kicking in, and I started looking around, all over. And that's when I saw him. On the other side of the street, standing next to a bus stop, it was that same man. I stopped walking and just stared at him as he was clearly already staring at me. I didn't do anything, but stood still until he lifted his arm to wave at me, smiling. I just picked up my pace to get home quickly, and thankfully he didn't follow. I told Curtis about it too, so we've been avoiding our normal spot, not wanting to run into him again. So far, neither of us has seen him since, but I don't want to take any chances. I don't know if this guy had bad intentions, if he was just trying to scare us, or maybe he was crazy, but whatever it was, I did not like the vibes I got from that man. I'll send you an update if I do run into him again, but to be honest, I hope I don't have to. This is another addition to some other oddities that have occurred at or around my home. My wife and I moved in here 3 years ago. We found a nice, quiet place, and there's access to several services. Gas stations, emergency services, eateries, that are all within 3 blocks of us. Pretty handy. There have been several things that have happened since we settled in, which I have written about before. I will try and jot some things down when I remember them. There have been so many creepy or just plain weird, scary, or wrong things that have gone on that I forgot some of them, really. I've almost forgotten more than I can recall. A good friend of mine has told me more than once that he thinks that I'm like a magnet for this stuff. And I told him that I don't want to see this stuff or have this weird stuff happen. I don't want to experience this crap. Someone told me that I'm probably sensitive and these things are attracted to me. What the hell does that mean? Am I easily hurt or sad for some reason? Why do I have to be plagued with this? Do I have to expect this garbage for the rest of my life? Seems like it. So, here is one that I remembered. I decided to get it down while I could. This really odd and unsettling thing happened 2 years ago during the summer. It was almost 11 a.m., and I was doing some work outside, and I was dragging the garden hose out and was stretching it down the driveway. I was going to wash my truck after spraying off the awnings, and I wanted to get it done before I lost the shade. I was about 20 feet from the road that run past out front, and I just had that weird gut feeling. Did you ever get that? You know, something is just not right. Well, for me, I get that. Not just having to experience things, I sometimes, for some nasty trick on me, seem to know when things aren't going to be as they should. I hope I could explain this so someone might understand, let alone comprehend. I heard a vehicle coming from the north corner of the block. I glanced up and saw a small, rusty, red-colored pickup. I don't know what make, it was just one of those small single-cab pickups with a bench seat, so it was probably made around the 70s. It sounded as old as it looked. And the exhaust was making some noise like it had some holes in it, and it was patched with a tin can. I don't suppose anyone remembers those days. Side note and fun fact for you, William, you're describing my first vehicle that I ever owned. Literally, 77 Dodge pickup truck, with a hole in the exhaust that made a popping noise. Sorry for the aside, I just wanted to add that. I stood there watching this small pickup coming down the road, getting closer, and as it did, I thought to myself, isn't that odd? I was looking at the cab of the truck and things just didn't look right. No, not right at all. That is wrong. Not happening. No. This is wrong. I could see inside the cab and see the seat, the steering wheel, dashboard. However, I couldn't see the driver. I was kind of transfixed. Is that the right word? I mean, I don't know if I moved other than turning towards the truck to look. I don't know if I blinked, said anything out loud, or even was breathing. I was just so intent on watching this truck going right past me, I don't know what else was going on. There was nobody sitting in the seat. I could see the entire seat. The windows were down on both sides, and there wasn't anywhere for someone to hide in there. It was too small. It was only going about 10 miles an hour. It came down the road, rolled past me, got to the corner, and slowed at the stop sign. It didn't stop, but rolled through, turning left and headed east. As I watched the whole damned thing, and didn't even think of my phone with a camera. At the time, I was so stuck on watching this that I wasn't thinking. I missed out on that. I've told a couple people, but they just say the usual stuff. I know they probably don't believe a thing I told them. It's frustrating when you have something happen and you have no proof. I've seen and heard things through my life that I can't explain or prove. But one night I heard something very, very bizarre. But this time I had a witness. I've spent a lot of time outside. By that, I mean like camping, hiking, fishing. I learned how to identify certain animal tracks and sounds made by them. Basically, I did a lot of stuff, heard a lot of stuff. I'm an outdoorsman. My wife and I were sitting in our living room watching TV, just having a nice, quiet evening at home. It was late fall and it was dark. The windows are closed, and all of a sudden there is this screaming sound. It was behind our house to the south corner of the property. There isn't any way I can tell how it sounded and do it justice. It was a screaming sound, maybe male. Hard to tell. It was hoarse or gravelly, changed tones, and my wife said the same thing that I was thinking. It sounded like an animal and human being combined. It really sounded creepy. It was nothing that I have ever heard in the woods or in town. Not a fox, coyote, wolf, bobcat, weasel, raccoon, skunk, owl, hawk that I have ever heard. And it was moving. It progressed from the south corner near the garage and went past the room of the house that we were sitting in, and toward the north to the alley. We've never heard it again. No idea what it was, and I still can't identify what we heard. I want to start this story by saying that I'm a bit of a broody person. It's just who I've always been. I've always been a bit more comfortable in the night when the world is silent and everyone else is asleep. I like to enjoy the time to myself. I also struggle with self-image and anxiety, so in order to keep myself active and healthy, I like to go for walks when it's pitch black outside, especially on nights where I'm struggling to sleep. On this particular night, I was feeling rather restless, and I decided that I would go out for a quick walk around the block. I grabbed my jacket, my headphones, and my flashlight and headed out into a rather lovely night. As anticipated, there was nobody else outside, minus the occasional car that would drive by every here and there. And it was a bit windy, so the leaves were blowing about, which made it that kind of magical night that I was hoping for. I was about 15 minutes into my walk when I was hit with this intense feeling that I needed to pause. It was a bit of a strange sensation, but I seriously felt like I just needed to stop for a moment. When I did, I noticed that one of the streetlights ahead of me was starting to flicker. I wasn't sure if it was flickering prior to me noticing it, but it was definitely flickering at the moment that I noticed it. After staring at it for a couple of seconds, I heard what sounded like a person saying, "Hey," from a bit of a distance. I was confused because I had my earphones in, and if there was someone that had said something from the distance it sounded like they were, I shouldn't have been able to hear them. I immediately took my earphones out and looked around, trying to see if I could see someone nearby that was calling out. When I turned back toward the streetlight that was flickering, it made a popping noise and completely went out, which made me jump. I wasn't sure what to do, but thought that I should just keep going, right? It was just a light. Surely that was just a really good timing on my part to be looking at it when it went out. I took a single step forward toward where the light was, and once again froze. A voice called out again with, "Hey, come here." My first instinct was to turn around and take off back home. But then my curiosity started to get the best of me. I know, stupid, but at the same time, this was too freaky to just turn away from and ignore. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on and then slowly lifted it towards the darkness where the dead streetlight was. Much to my relief, there was nothing there. I actually chuckled to myself, thinking that I was just losing it and that I needed to get home and sleep. Just as I was about to turn off the flashlight and continue on, my eyes caught a glimpse of motion on the edge of the light, which shifted me from my relief back to terror. I watched as what looked like a shadow quickly darted away from my flashlight and over toward the wooded edge of the street. I tried to follow it, quickly shining to the left, but I couldn't see anything. My heart skipped a beat as I stood there and just watched the tree line for what felt like several awkward moments. I just held the light, pointing it at the trees and waiting for something to happen. Unfortunately, something did. I saw what, again, looked like a shadow, leaning slightly out from behind one of the trees. I was pointing my light directly at this thing, and yet it was still completely dark. As it leaned out, I once again heard that voice whisper, "Hey, come here. Please, come here." For a single fleeting second, I actually considered going towards it. But then my brain kicked back in and I realized that that would be the dumbest thing I could possibly do. I had no idea what the hell this thing was. I had no idea what its intentions were, and I was pretty much defenseless. Once that thought occurred to me, I felt that wave of terror wash over me. My legs felt like jelly, but I knew that I needed to get out of there. I started to turn to head back home, but was interrupted by what really triggered my flight response. That voice once again whispered at me, but this time, it said, "I won't hurt you." Nothing that says "I won't hurt you" in the way that it did actually means it. I immediately turned and took off at a full sprint. I have never in my life run that fast, or for that long, but I made record time getting back to my front door. I fumbled with my keys, jumped in, and locked the door, and then paused as I caught my breath and tried to slow my heart down. After a few moments of just standing against my front door in silence, I decided that I would go to bed. And thankfully, that was the entire experience. The rest of the night was uneventful, and I haven't gone on a night walk down that road since. I thought about going back to see if I could find this thing again, but it kind of occurred to me that if I was that scared that night, there was a reason. It wasn't just because it was weird, it was instinctual. So, I've decided that whatever that thing was, someone else out there can take the credit for finding it. I would like to recount something that happened 25 years ago when my wife and I were buying a place in the country. It was an old farm property, but all that was left of it was a pole barn used for a garage, an old barn that needed to be torn down, and the house. It was located at the top of a hill that really offered a nice view. You could see 15 miles to the west and see the town that was in that direction. We had nearly 3 acres, and I had done a lot of work on that property to make it look better. I had cleared a lot of brush, tore down the old barn, and was digging out an area for a small pond. I had mowed trails around the back of the property to walk around. I had my mower in the garage, working on the engine. I was taking off the points used for spark to the spark plug, and was replacing it. It was an electronic ignition system. A friend showed me how to do that because the plug would fire better and last longer. I had been out there for quite a while trying to get the flywheel off and get it redone. It was winter, and there was a good foot of snow on the ground, but I had the door pulled down and a space heater going, so it wasn't too awfully bad out there. Besides, whether it was cold or not, I still had to get my mower fixed so I could use it to plow the drive out. It was getting late, about 11 at night. The garage was 40 feet from the house, and I was just basically focused on what I was doing, not really thinking of anything other than making sure I wasn't screwing something up. All of a sudden, and I mean that, it was sudden, something hit the door that led to the other half of the pole barn/garage. From in there was a doorway to the back of this building. There was 2 small rooms in the back that looked like they used to be for animals. Whatever hit the door was heavy, and pretty forceful. It sounded like someone threw a cinder block at it, hard. It scared the crap out of me. I was sitting down while I was working, but I was up and backpedaling, and at the same time I threw the breaker bar that was in my hand at the door. It smacked the door and dropped to the ground right in front of the door. I headed to the house and got my rifle and big flashlight and headed back out. I told my wife what had happened and she told me to be careful. I went back into the garage and I opened that door to the other section. I only had the light of my flashlight, because there wasn't any lighting in this other part. I had my rifle cocked and checked the other side of the door. There was definitely a mark on that side, but I couldn't find anything that had hit it. There was nothing on the ground or even close to that door that would have hit it. I looked up to the loft area where there was some stuff piled up. Nothing. I went to the first room in the back and checked there, and then the last room. That room was always a little spooky for some reason. It had a low ceiling and I had to stoop over to go in there. There was an opening in the last room, and I stepped out the back and shined my light around. All around the area, even up on the roof. There were no tracks in the snow, so nothing had come in or out that way. I walked all the way around the structure, and the only footprints were mine that led to the house and back. I couldn't find a thing that could have made that loud bang against that door. I couldn't even find a raccoon. Nothing. But I had to get that engine back together. So I went back in and I was going to finish things up, but when I went to pick up my breaker bar, I couldn't find it. It had fallen to the ground right in front of the door. I saw it laying there when I came back out with my rifle, but it was gone. I stood there looking at that spot that I know that it had landed. Then I spotted it. It was laying on top of the mower engine. Something was in there, and it placed my breaker bar on top of that engine. I picked up my rifle and sort of backed all the way back to the house. Needless to say, I didn't want to be out there anymore that night, and I never found out what could have hit that door. About a month ago, it was the night before I had a maths exam and coding project to hand in both on the same day. As you can imagine, despite putting in a fair bit of effort, I was extremely nervous and felt like I wasn't really ready for either of them. Despite this, when it reached 10 p.m., I decided to go to bed and just hope for the best. And while I ended up doing okay on both of these, that isn't what worries me. You see, when I went to bed that night, every single time I would fall asleep, have a nightmare, and then wake up about an hour later, only to fall asleep and have that process repeat again, but with a different nightmare. This wasn't shocking to me, as I was obviously nervous for what I had the next day, and my brain was conveying that through the dreams I was having, even though none of them actually had to do with school in any way. In one of the nightmares, I was in my backyard and it looked to be my own, when I saw, about 5 meters away, around the corner of my house, a long shadowy figure with a head that was an oval shape, sort of like a UFO. It had 3 white glowing eyes, one in the center of this oval and 2 a bit off to the sides, placed at positions that seemed fairly normal. I remember being aware that I was in a dream, and not feeling scared. I thought to myself, wow, for once this isn't even scary, or something like that. As I had that thought, the shadowy figure quickly zoomed into me while speaking. It had legs, but if I remember correctly, it didn't look like it walked. It just simply hovered towards me, with no warning or anything. The moment this happened, it made me so scared that I woke up. I woke up before it could finish the sentence that it was saying. However, after waking up, it kept talking until the end of the sentence and then stopped. This terrified me, and it made me hide under the blankets, which is something you wouldn't normally do at 15 years old. The voice sounded like that of a middle-aged man, and it sounded like it was coming from my room. It was very clearly a male voice, and it did not sound supernatural. but it was a voice that I have never heard before and have yet to hear since. Before anyone asks, no, I don't remember what it said to me, but I'm pretty sure the sentence contained the word man. While I do think this was just a dream, and I was somehow able to hear the last word awake because I was perhaps half asleep, or so worried that I started hallucinating or something, I can't help but notice that I've heard of no one experiencing this same thing. I'll apologize now in case this isn't written correctly. I'm not good with computers. I grew up without all this technical stuff. I read a few of those stories that people had sent in, and I kind of stewed on this for a while, but I finally decided to send it in. It's probably my very first weird thing that has happened to me. This happened a long time ago when I was 5. I just felt like I needed to get this out there before I die. I was home playing in the backyard. It was summer and sunny out. We had one of those swing sets that had just 2 swings and a teeter-totter. I was swinging and, I guess, lucky to be facing the hedge that was about 20 feet away, and I can remember this whole thing like it just happened. The property on the other side of the hedge was like a junkyard. There were old car parts, a couple of old cars that we used to play in, boards, old crates, etc. But it was a breeding ground for snakes. If you lifted anything up, there were a few snakes under it. Well, I spotted a garden snake coming out from under a bush at the hedge. It started heading towards me, so I jumped off the swing to run to the northeast corner of the house. I watched that snake come to the spot where I had been, and then turn and was coming through the grass, headed towards me again. That would be another 20 feet to the house. I ran down the walk at the back of the house to the southwest corner, which was about 30 feet, so I couldn't see the snake anymore. I was only 3 foot something and the grass was covering it. I stood there watching, and sure enough, that damned thing came out of the walk, turned south, and was coming towards me again. Now, you have to understand, I was 5. That was pretty scary for a 5-year-old. Well, yeah, I was scared. I ran to the front of the house to the corner where the steps go up for the front porch. That house is still there. They've added on an enclosed porch. Back then, it was an open porch with solid wood railings. I again watched, scared out of my mind as that snake came around the southwest corner of the house. I could barely move, but when it got to about 10 feet from me, I bolted up the steps to get into the house. However, my mom had the screen door locked, and I couldn't get in. I remember screaming bloody murder for, to me, what felt like a long time. By then, that snake had come up the cement steps and was looking over the top step at me. My mom had been inside talking to the school nurse for the school that I would be going to. They came out, the nurse saw the snake, stomped her foot and clapped her hands at the same time, and the snake took off. I've never forgotten that, and no one that I have recounted this to has ever heard of a garden snake chasing someone. I would really like to know what made that snake follow me, because they just don't do that. Hello. I would like to share this past life story, or at least what I presume to be a past life story. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I started referring to myself as Charlie. My name was not Charlie, and in fact, I am female. Charlie was a dark-skinned boy. He was Native American. He did not look like the horrible depictions of Native Americans that I saw on Western television shows. In fact, I did not even know what a Native American was. but I knew that I was a 12-year-old boy who had been taken from his family. The white people had cut my hair short, and I wore white people clothes. I could picture the clothing that my real family wore. It was beautiful woven material full of colors and ceremonial headdress. I was not allowed to wear those clothes, and I was not allowed to speak the tongue of my family. I remembered my family, but spent the rest of my life living as a white person. That life was short, however. I died at the age of 15 when I consumed some type of food that poisoned me. Interestingly, whenever I turned 15 years old in this life, these memories faded. Later in life, I learned of the native tribes that once lived on what is now American soil. I learned of Indian children being taken from their families so that they could be assimilated into white society. I also learned that many foods, especially milk, killed many of these children because their bodies were not able to digest it properly. I don't know if this is truly a past life story. I only know that there is no way that growing up in the 1960s, I would have known of any of this. Not only did we not learn it in school, but we didn't see it on TV. And at the age of 4 or 5, I truly would have had no context for it. My parents just thought that I had an imaginary friend that I would eventually outgrow. To this day, I am educated in Puebloan history of the Southwest. I love the music, culture, food, and wisdom of what I consider to be my ancient elders. Thank you for sharing this story. In 1990, when I lived in the old Masonic apartment building on Geary and Larkin in San Francisco, my roommate and I were both asleep when we both had the same dream of an extremely attractive man who looked different to each of us, according to our tastes. Once he appeared, he started trying to seduce us. But when he got close, he started to change into something so vile and disgusting, it could put one off to adult relations for a long time. And it kind of did for me. At the point that he was close enough to touch us both, we tried to wake up, but we were stuck in sleep paralysis, trying not to be touched by this thing. The only way I can describe it is a total sickening perversion of everything a person could find attractive in a man, according to your tastes beyond your wildest fantasies. When it got to the point that he was about to touch us, we both broke out of the paralysis at the exact same time, and simultaneously called each other's names until we were both wide awake. We sat up talking about it for a while, and I think we stayed up all night, not wanting to go back to sleep. This was completely different from my normal sleep paralysis that can easily be explained by broken sleeping patterns. While the normal kind that I wake up with is because I have to go to the bathroom really bad, or I can't breathe because my sinuses and throat are dried out from the heater. I only panic when I can't breathe, and I fight hard to get out of it. But there's no demonic anything going on, just a bad dream related to suffocating or peeing myself. I'm aware of what's happening and it's maddening, but not scary. What my roommate and I experienced in that apartment can only be an incubus. Thank you for sticking with this rather personal story. I tried to make sure that it wasn't TMI. So that, my friends, was a collection of true scary stories from you. True scary stories that all come from subscribers directly submitted on my website at astheravendreams.com, or occasionally submitted to my subreddit, or submitted through the secret route. The secret route, if you don't know, is email. I'd never recommend sending me stories through email, but I also understand that it's easier for some people to just type astheravendreams@gmail.com or astheravendreams@outlook.com into their email service provider page and send me their story. It works either way. The email ones, sometimes I miss them for a little while, but I do get them. I always get them. They are always there. It just, sometimes there's a delay. Because some people like to mess with people like me who have their email addresses public, and they like to put our email addresses on what's known as spam lists. What this does, for the most part, is nothing. For the most part, it just fills up our spam folder with trash, whatever, we can just delete. Unfortunately, sometimes those trash emails do get through, and they clog up the inbox, so I have to spend 20 minutes cleaning out garbage. And sometimes I just don't feel like doing that, so yeah, you get it. My point is, I do get the stories. They are there. I just check it a couple times a week, and sometimes I miss them whenever I don't check it, so I get the story. If you want to email it to me, go for it, astheravendreams@gmail or outlook.com, either one. Astheravendreams.com, there's a button to submit your story. Subreddit r/theravensdream. You can type it there if you're into Reddit. It all works. I get it either way. It comes to Raven. Raven makes the stories in a list, puts the stories in a list, and then narrates them. Look at me, bambling like always. Yeah. As you can tell, I'm doing quite a bit better. Voice is still, I'd probably say 80 to 90%. But yeah, drinking tea. I recently bought some thyme tea, Thyme, the spice, yes, the seasoning. It's actually pretty good. It tastes a little earthy, but it's supposedly really good at preventing coughing. So, I don't know, we'll see. Nothing else to say, other than if you liked the video, please do hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing. If you feel ever so bold, you can leave me a comment down below letting me know your thoughts or how you're doing, or really whatever you want to leave in a comment. I'm cool with anything that's cool with you, I suppose. As long as it's not insulting or rude. Don't be rude, I'll cry. Or do, I won't cry. I'll just laugh. You can't be meaner to me than I am to myself, trust me. Anyways, you can also join Patreon membership where you get early access to content like this and other things, depending on how you sign up. And there's a P.O. box on my community tab that you can send a postcard to if you wish to. Everyone who sends me a postcard will get one back. I'm just going to leave it open. If you ever want to send one at any time, I'll send one back. That's just how it's going to work. So, and while supplies last, if you send me a postcard and I send you a postcard back, you will probably also be getting some small merch like a sticker or a magnet or something like that. I need to order more, but I still have some left, so I'm just going to send them out with my postcards. Yeah. All that said, friends, hope you're having a beautiful day. Hope I do see you again here very soon, but until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, friends, much love, and please, sleep well.